The Race to Eternity. The day marathon man James Worson accepted a sporting challenge was the day he disappeared from the face of the earth. The proud, athletic English shoemaker screamed once and vanished forever. On September 3, 1873, Worson boasted of his athletic prowess to two fellow townsfolk of Leamington, Warwickshire. He said that on more than one occasion he'd raced from one town to another in record time. The people of Leamington knew Worson's talents as a foot racer, but his friends were still skeptical. He might be as good as he thought, they told him, but could he prove it? Worson happily accepted the challenge. He would show them, he said, with a 20-mile run from Leamington to Coventry. They began the test in high spirits. Worson put on his running shoes and set out. His friends Hammerson Burns and Barnum Wise trailed close behind him in a horse-drawn gig, Burns carrying a camera. The mood of the three was still festive a quarter of the way to Coventry. Worson appeared as tireless as he claimed, running with ease and turning occasionally to exchange words with his friends. The runner was never out of their sight. Running in the middle of the dirt road, Worson suddenly appeared to stumble. He pitched forward in a headlong fall and had time for only one piercing loud scream. Wise said later, "It was the most ghastly sound either of us had ever heard." The terrible cry was their last memory of him. Worson's body never struck the ground. He vanished in the middle of his fall without touching the earth. The road itself provided tangible evidence of what they had witnessed. Burns's pictures of the long-distance runner's tracks, clear footprints in the soft dirt, faltering and ending as abruptly as if Worson had crashed into a stone wall. When the men returned to Leamington, a massive hunt began. Searchers combed every inch of the terrain between Leamington and Coventry without success. Bloodhounds were strangely reluctant to approach the spot where Worson's footprints had ended. And for years after his disappearance, there were reports of a ghostly green runner on the empty night road from Leamington to Coventry. The Spinster's Grave. Spinster Hannah Beswick died more than 200 years ago. Her body was embalmed, but her restless spirit still haunts a factory built on the land where her home once stood. Hannah was a wealthy Lancashire landowner whose house, Birch and Bower, dominated acres of fertile land at Hollinwood, on the outskirts of Manchester. She is not normally fearful, but in 1745, Bonnie Prince Charlie crossed the border in England and advanced south. She became so obsessed with the thought of the invading Scots that she hid all of her money and valuables. They remained hidden for the rest of her life. Apart from the Scots, her only real terror was that of being buried alive. A fear quite understandable in light of what had happened in her own family. One of her brothers had fallen ill and, while unconscious, had been pronounced dead by a local doctor. Preparations were made for his funeral. He was laid in an open coffin so that friends and relatives could pay their last respects. While lying in his shroud surrounded by flowers, he began to show signs of life. The unfortunate man was hastily removed to his bed. Hannah died in 1768 without divulging where she had hidden her fortune. Because of what had happened to her brother, she took steps to ensure that her corpse wasn't buried. She left Birch and Bower to young Dr. Charles White, with the stipulation that he must have her embalmed and kept in a safe and respectable place above ground. For some strange reason, she also insisted that every 21 years, her body should be taken back to the house and allowed to lie in the granary for 7 days. Old Hannah was duly mummified, her body coated with tar, and wrapped in heavy linen bandages. In accordance with her wishes, the face was left uncovered. For many years, Dr. White faithfully kept the body at his own home, Sale Priory. But when he died, it was moved to Manchester Natural History Society's museum, where it became a major attraction. A century after Hannah Beswick was embalmed, the commissioners of the society, finding the museum was overfilled with relics and needing room for new acquisitions, decided it was time she was given a proper burial. She was finally interred at Hartford Cemetery on July 22, 1868. Some people had already claimed to have seen her ghost wandering through the rooms of Birchen Bower, dressed in her usual black silk gown and white lace cap. After burial, the ghost became more agitated. Hannah was seen hurrying between the old barn and the pond as though deeply troubled. Sometimes, it was said, the old barn glowed as if it was on fire. The house remained empty for some years, inhabited only by the spirit of Hannah Beswick. It was bought by a developer, renovated, and converted into small dwellings to be rented out to cotton workers and laborers. New tenants were often to see her drifting by, head bent as though in deep thought. One particular aspect of her behavior was puzzling. Sometimes she'd disappear at a particular spot, a corner flagstone in the parlor of a house occupied by a handloom weaver. Hannah seemed to hover about this room, as though reluctant to leave it. The weaver decided to pull up part of the flagstone floor to make a place where he could install a new loom. To his amazement, he found hidden underneath a hoard of gold. He found part of Hannah Beswick's fortune. After this, Hannah was seen frequently, no longer thoughtful but angry and menacing. People spoke of a brilliant blue light darting from her eyes. Sometimes at night she was seen near the pond, and other times strange, unearthly noises were heard in the barn. No one would venture there after dark unless they had urgent business. It gave rise to the speculation that perhaps the rest of her valuables were hidden nearby, and she was determined to protect them. The hauntings continued until Birchen Bower was demolished. A factory was built on the spot, and that was thought to be the end of the fair. Then people who knew nothing of her story began saying they had caught a glimpse of a strange, old-world figure in a black silk gown and white lace cap. Hands of Grisley Glory. Thieves in the 18th century tried to ensure success for their crimes by invoking the aid of the dead. The villains believed a candle gripped in the cut-off hand of a man who died on the gallows had the supernatural power to stupefy anyone they wished to rob. In the 1790s, a traveler in woman's clothing arrived at Old Spittal Inn, which stood at Stainmore between Barnard Castle and Brough on windswept Bowes Moor in County Durham. The new arrival asked only to be allowed to doze by the fire before continuing her journey. The landlord ordered a maid to sit with the visitor. The maid was suspicious, for she was sure she had spotted trousers peeping below the skirts of the woman. The maid pretended to be asleep. When all was quiet, the traveler pulled out a hand taken from the body of an executed felon and wedged a candle between the dead fingers. He recited, "Let those who sleep, sleep on. Let those who are awake, be awake." The man then unlocked the door and called softly to accomplices waiting outside. The watchful maid wasted no time. She rushed at the door, slamming it shut and bolting it with the would-be raiders outside. She then dashed upstairs to rouse her employer, but she could not waken him. Downstairs, the door was being smashed by the gang. The candle was still burning in its macabre holder, and the girl remembered the legend that only extinguishing the flame with milk broke its spell. She grabbed a jug of skimmed milk from the kitchen and upended it over the hand. The flame died, and as it did, the landlord and his staff were woken by the noise downstairs. The thieves promised to leave once their candle was returned, but they were forced to flee empty-handed when the innkeeper opened fire with his shotgun. The Grisley candle holders were called Hands of Glory, And similar stories have been heard in other parts of England and in France, Belgium, and Ireland. One Encyclopedia Superstition lists the mysterious ingredients of the candle as being the fat of a hangman, virgin wax, and Lapland sesame. Thanks for sitting around and humoring an old fox and his tales. If you'd like more, please hit like and subscribe. And remember, nothing is more frightening than a fear you cannot name.